Sonic the Hedgehog, a beloved video game character, but there's a lot more about him that you don't know. Like, did you know that he was a teacher once? Where the f was he when I was failing calculus?
Everybody knows about Sonic, the blue hedgehog who can run very fast. Honestly, I could text my grandma right now and she'd tell me all about Dr. Robotnik. Sonic is one of those game franchises that just has that recognizability to it. You see a Sonic game and you're like, yep, I know that one, that's that one game. However, despite his notoriety, Sonic has a couple games that have slipped through the cracks over time. Sure, everybody knows what Sonic 2 is, but do they know about the sequel? There's not too many Sonic games that are super obscure anymore, at least the Sonic fans. A lot of games have been re-released or talked about a bunch online already. However, I still want to talk about a few Sonic games that just aren't brought up as much and are a very interesting part of Sonic's history. Also, this will be one of the only times I ever talk about Sonic by himself. You won't catch me dead making Sonic 06 jokes or bombing Metacritic scores. Actually, before we start, here's a 10-second review on Sonic Frontiers. As of writing this, I'm like 11 hours into the game. The movement can be kinda jagged and goofy. I like the combat. The story is pretty good. The voice acting is good. I give it like an 8 out of 10, but I gotta finish it, so like, yeah.
Anyways, enough talking about an actual fun and well put together game. We gotta talk about a random ass game from the 90s on the computer that only like 12 people have heard about. That's like how most of my videos go, isn't it?
Let's start with the earliest example of some forgotten Sonic games, like the time he was on your landline. Sega Game Toshokan, or Sega Game Library, was a game service made exclusively for Japan in 1990 on the Mega Drive. Getting this thing to work was a whole process. First, you'd have to buy a Mega Modem, which was a modem for the console that let you do online and get various online services. You needed a Sega MegaNet subscription, which was an online service you had to pay for monthly, and the cartridge for the Sega Game Library. Through all of that, you could select from exclusive games for the console. Now, we could sit here and talk about the 80 Phantasy Star 2 games they made, but Phantasy Star doesn't have school supplies in the name, does it? Sonic was one of the few games and the only Sonic game made for the Sega Game Library. Why does nobody talk about it? Probably because it's f***ing boring. It's just a generic puzzle game, very similar to Puyo Puyo, where you can either do multiplayer or go up against the computer. You drop the blocks of shapes, try to match up with similar ones, and be the last one standing. This game has nothing to do with Sonic, however, every now and then, if you can get a crazy combo off, you'll run into your opponent and stun them for a little bit. That's all I really have to say about this game. It's just a very generic puzzle game with absolutely nothing to say about it. Another game that was released on the Genesis, well, was supposed to be released on the Genesis, was Sonic Crackers. As appetizing as the name sounds, this was actually just a leaked prototype for a canned Sonic game that was supposed to drop sometime in the 90s. I couldn't get the legitimate cartridge that I had to work, so I won't be able to go too in depth. The game features both Sonic and Tails going through your average 2D Sonic stage, but with this tether mechanic where both characters are holding a ring. You could use it to hang on to platforms, throw tails, all that fun stuff. From what I've seen, it looks like your standard Sonic platformer, except you could walk on walls and stuff. I don't know if that was intentional, but it's still cool. There's also these top-down levels called field levels where you can roam around, but you really can't do anything in it because it's not finished. If you know Sonic games somewhat well, you should immediately notice how similar this game is to Knuckles Chaotix. And that's because this prototype is actually an early version of that game. Obviously, it didn't get too far into development, as there's only one sort of finished world with 4 levels to navigate and 2 field levels. The levels themselves are just palette swaps of the first one, so yeah, there's not a whole lot to look at here either. Although there's not much to say about this one, it is an interesting part of Sonic's history. Also, apparently the game's name comes from the really gross title screen art, which, I mean, I don't really get it, but alright, sure.
Never mind, I totally get it.
Let's just go in chronological order for the rest of these games I'll be talking about. Next in line is the most evil fucking game of all time. Let me explain. So back in the mid-90s, the Game Gear was going strong. Well, I mean, it sold better than the Super Nintendo Classic, so I guess that's something. Anyways, as a Sega console, it had a ton of Sonic games, such as Triple Trouble or the Drift series. I mean, these ones are sorta well known. I don't know, I asked my dying grandmother and she seemed to only know about the 16-bit Triple Trouble remake. However, I would argue that one of the most forgettable Game Gear Sonic titles were the ones based on Tails the Fox. Besides Mean Bean Machine and Shadow the Hedgehog, these games are some of the only Sonic spin-offs that don't feature Sonic as the main character, which is actually kind of crazy considering how popular the franchise is and its characters are. I decided to only choose one of the 2 games to look at, Tails Skypatrol. Was the game good?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Okay, listen, I'll get to my issues with the game in a bit, I swear. Tails Skypatrol was a Japan exclusive that released in 1995 and was also featured in a couple Sonic collections. I actually played this one a few times when I was a kid on the Sonic Gems collection. Very glad I didn't pursue it further. The game opens up with a ripping story. There's Witch, who turns people into crystals, and for some reason Tails just happens to be flying by, and like the good Samaritan he is, he goes down to save the day. I really like the gameplay here. It's an auto-scroller more similar to a shooter than a platformer, where you're playing as Tails flying to the end of the level. Your main thing you can do, besides avoiding enemies and whatnot, is use this gold ring you can throw at enemies, attach to things like weights to drop down or balloons to float up, or hang on to these little swingy bars and throw yourself around. If you get hit, you spiral out of control and you can't move until you mash buttons to get out of it. Also, you have a flying meter in the top left. You can pick up candy to replenish it, but if it runs out, you fall violently into the ground and crash with no hopes of surviving. Now, I bet you're wondering, why do I hate this game so much? Well, it took me a few hours to beat, I really like the gameplay, so what's the matter? The game is fucking impossible! Tails is always moving to the right, so naturally you'd run into stuff every now and then, but if you run into anything that isn't a basic enemy, you lose a life and go back to your checkpoint, which you could actually miss the checkpoints while passing it if you don't hit it properly. Tails' hitbox is also all kinds of wonky. Sometimes it feels too small, and sometimes it feels like you hit everything on the screen. Also, as I'll discuss in a bit, the level design is kind of insane, especially for a game that's supposedly made with kids in mind. And normally I just chalk something up like that to me being horrible at video games, but no, other people online agree with me. This game is infuriating. Thank God it wasn't the length of an average Sonic game, or else I'd be fucking bones by the time I beat it. Also, yes, I did use save states for my own sanity. I wasn't restarting the level every time I died, which was a lot. Anyways, like I said, there's 5 levels. First is the training stage where you learn the basics, but you don't actually learn the basics. You just kind of have to figure things out on your own. And once you do that, you should be fine throughout the rest of it. Level 2 is Rail Canyon area, a foresty level. It's not too difficult, a lot of projectile enemies. You can get caught by surprise by these splitting paths sometimes, but other than that, it's not too horrible once you figure out the layout. The boss is Wile E. Coyote. Oh, I forgot to mention, to defeat all the bosses, you need to stun them by hitting them and then throw them against the surface. Level 3 is Runewood area, a cave level. This one feels very cramped, and it's easy to get confused on what's an obstacle and what's in the background. Anyways, just go slowly through the stage and don't get caught by the stupid spheres that fill the area. I hate those things. Also, the stage introduces these annoying ass dogs that bite your ring and weigh you down. Stupid ass enemies aside, this one didn't take too long. I ran out of flight a few times because if you miss certain candies, you're fucked. The boss is a bear. He's just the last boss, but he throws more projectiles. After those 2 levels, we start to begin the descent into madness. Metal Island area, an airship level. The level itself is fairly easy, just don't get caught by surprise by platforms, because it's very easy to be fighting an enemy and you start falling right next to a platform. However, the dumbassery doesn't start until you fight the boss, a flying rabbit. I don't know if I'm just brain dead or I was doing something wrong, but this fight took way longer than the others. You'd go in to hit her with your ring, but then she'll stop moving right as you move at her, which stuns you. Or, while you're running after her, a random ass carrot will just fly in from the sky and hit you. If you aren't able to successfully get in front of her, you'll run out of flight and die. I couldn't imagine this game without save states, but trust me when I say, it gets much worse. The final stage, Dark Castle area. Apparently it's infamous online among the people who've played it, and rightfully so. The difficulty is just insanely amped from the previous stages. Enemies are everywhere you go, even from the very beginning. They just constantly spam projectiles at you and seemingly come out of nowhere. Especially these beach ball motherfuckers who are just annoying to kill. Because if you hit them, you still get hit by their ball. There's the introduction of these levers to activate doors, where if you accidentally miss one, woohoo, you can't progress in the game. There's basically traps and obstacles on every inch of the map, including the annoying spheres, these dumb spinning door thingies, everything that the game has to offer. And remember, if you touch anything during this whole chaotic mess that is not an enemy, you're dead, and it's back to the last checkpoint if you even manage to get it. 2 more deaths and it's game over, back to the start. I do think I could have beaten the game without save states, but it would have driven me insane if I didn't. Anyways, the final boss is the witch from the beginning. She's not horrible, definitely spams projectiles the most, but honestly, after playing against the rabbit for like 20 minutes, I was given the strats I needed to beat the final boss. Tails captures the witch and saves the island. Honestly, I really liked the game. It was a unique Sonic game that was fairly short and worth a play. However, I hate this game with every fiber of my being because of how stupidly difficult it gets towards the end. I'm being 100% honest when I'm saying that this is the most frustrated I've gotten at a video game in years, and I only spent an hour beating it. Fuck this game, I love it.
I need a little something to take off the edge. Wait, how about a fun educational game learning math with your good pal Sonic? Let's talk about Sonic Schoolhouse.
Released in 1996, made by Orion Interactive, Sonic Schoolhouse was an educational Sonic game where you could learn basic elementary stuff with your good old pal, Mr. Needlemouse. Now, I really didn't want to talk about this game since I feel like it's not crazy obscure anymore. I think it deserves a video of its own, but I feel like your local youth pastor won't know about it, so hey, it's obscure enough for me. The title screen is the most 90s computer game looking thing I've ever seen. You got your bad 3D renders, your weird choice of graphic design, and the crispy voice of Sonic. Interestingly, this is the only time Sonic has ever been officially voiced by a girl, being voiced by Meg in Gleema, in her only ever documented voice acting role. Meg, if you see this, I beg you to contact me. We could talk about Sonic 3D Blast or something. Besides the title screen and one or two cutscenes in the game, I couldn't get my audio to work, so I was playing this in complete silence for the rest of the game. Playing it like I did was like if Baldi's Basics was actually scary. Anyways, the gameplay is very simple. You roam around in this 3D Willy Wonka-ass classroom with oddly the same controls as Doom. There's 4 doors you can enter for math, reading, spelling, and more advanced math. Entering one of the rooms leads you to a giant classroom with doors, questions on the wall, and balloons everywhere. It's very straightforward. You pick up the various balloons on the ground to answer the questions on the blackboards, which can open doors when you get the questions right. I mean, it really wasn't too challenging, but somehow I still managed to get basic multiplication wrong once or twice. Only yours truly could manage that. Robotnik is also in the levels as an obstacle. If you run into him, you just lose your balloon. Some doors have items behind them, such as a key, buses, and little Sonics, which do all different things. Once you've completed the education levels, you can use what you've collected to go off and do other things. First, there's the recess mode that you use the little Sonics to access. Basically, this is the fun portion of the game for doing so well in the education parts. You run around, collect rings, and avoid enemies. I mean, it's something. If anything, it's more boring than the classrooms because at least there's actual substance in those levels instead of just running around for a bit to collect 10 rings. There's also the field trips, which you can access with the buses you collect. You click on a horrific 3D model of an animal, and you get 3 crusty MP4 files with fun facts about the animal you selected. I mean, it's neat, I guess. It was the first game audio I was able to hear since the beginning, so that was nice. And honestly, that's about it. Obviously, a grown-ass man as myself would find this boring, but if I knew about this game when I was in elementary school, I would have been all over it. It's got decent replayability for an edutainment game, and let's be honest, if Sonic tells any 5-year-old to practice their addition, they'll eat that shit right up. So those are just a few obscure Sonic games. There are so many more I would have loved to discuss, so let me just give out a few quick honorable mentions. Sonic X for the Leapster was another educational game that was released in 2005, but for some reason the EU had to wait 2 more years for it. Sadly, there's no real way to emulate Leapster games yet, and while I do own one, it's 3 hours away from my current location, so yeah, I didn't want to talk about another game that I couldn't play. Tales and the Music Maker was a game for the Sega Pico, this weird book-tablet hybrid console that I think was supposed to be educational. By the looks of it, it was a music-inspired platform minigame collection. It also weirdly used Tales from the original cartoon for the sprites. There was also the Sonic Cafe game service back in the early 2000s, where you could pay a small fee every month for access to a bunch of random Sonic mobile games like tennis, racing, darts, etc. However, what I remember from Sonic mobile games was when they ported Sonic 1 to the original iPod. This was the craziest thing to see as a kid, but looking back now, I'd rather saw off both my thumbs and play this game with a scroll wheel.
Sonic's history is truly something interesting. It was a lot of fun going through all these obscure games. Maybe I'll visit again sometime in the future. Or I could eat this Chaos Emerald right here as fast as I can!
To get fit and trim, Now shake a leg and you will get slim.
You know it, baby.